Eggs, the podcast featuring the best and brightest minds in business leadership, entrepreneurship, and technology. In today's episode, we have the pleasure of sitting down with Jake Hurwitz, founder of Thursday Labs, a strategic content agency that helps clients connect with their audience on an emotional level. Jake has been a serial entrepreneur since the age of 8, and his journey is nothing short of extraordinary. His passions for adventure, exploration, and fostering connections have driven him to establish 6 companies, each contributing to various industries. He's also hosted over 200 dinner parties across the U.S., providing a space for individuals from various backgrounds to interact, exchange ideas, and form meaningful relationships. Today, we talk to Jake about his journey, his insights into the world of startups and investments, and his vision for a more entrepreneurial world. Well, we're excited to get going, so let's get to it. Please join us in welcoming to the show, Jake Hurwitz. Hey, Jake, how are you, man? Welcome to the show.
I'm good. Thanks for having me, you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no
Thrilled
worries.
to have you.
Excited for the conversation.
Yeah, totally. I like that intro. That was cool.
That's all right.
Yeah. Well, the problem is with those intros, I mean, they're great because they do a little bit of a job of, encapsulating the person. And it's funny because we do that intro and then almost always our very first question is tell us about yourself. Right. So it's kind of funny because it's like, well, we just heard about you. But with you, like with many of our guests, I mean, the story is actually much more multifaceted than that little, 45-second intro could lay out. So it might be good to just do like we always do and start at the beginning. Maybe tell us a little about yourself, where you come from and what you're up to.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you asking it that way. And it feels like I can take this approach of like, who am I versus just what have I done and what do I do? I grew up in New York in a suburb of Manhattan, though my dad lived in the city for a large chunk of my childhood. I mean, I would say a huge part of my childhood was defined by action sports, skateboarding, snowboarding, mountain biking, BMX. There were even elements of like scootering in there. And I was the kid that wasn't ever good enough to skate with the big boys, the older kids in school, but I had the camera. And so they would invite me to hang with them at the skate park. And, skateboarding culture, especially for teenagers, is very much like almost like Greek life. I was never in Greek life, but like this was at least how I interpreted it. If you're good enough to hang with us from a skill level, you can hang with us. And if not, like you're not in the crew. And that's how it was with skateboarding. And I was not good enough to hang with them, but because I had the camera and everyone wanted the kid to film and make YouTube videos for them, I was invited. So I just fell in love from such an early age. I mean, we're talking like 8 years old or 10 years old with not even just cameras, but also like, how do I tell a story? How do I impact the lighting and you have the right music to make someone feel something when they watch our content on YouTube? So yeah, I got into YouTube and then we had a MySpace channel and we had a Facebook page and we made merch and I had to design the merch. And so I was the kid who was, I had, I think, a few thousand followers on YouTube in like 2006 or 2007 for all of our skateboarding content and like graffiti content and all that stuff. I don't even know if YouTube had been bought by Google yet. So I really grew up, torrenting Photoshop and After Effects and Final Cut Pro and all these various tools. Had to learn HTML when I was a kid. And it's funny. I saw this interesting tweet or quote recently that I really enjoyed, which was, if you're a teenager and you're able to go against the grain as a teenager, like not do what's trendy and not do what all the other kids are doing, that'll be a superpower for life. Because it's like never going to be harder to do that in your life than when you're a teenager, when there's bullies and kids really give a shit. And I look back and like, I was totally that kid. And I loved that. I totally got bullied a lot, but it wasn't that big of a deal, I would say. And that's what led me to my career. I started an actual agency when I moved to Boulder when I was 18 and ran that for about 4 years, worked on a few startups towards the tail end of those 4 years, built one, we raised some money and shut it down. Then I joined a startup studio right out of college as the VP of branding. It was called Boulder Bits. It was very early at the time for the startup studio industry. No one really heard of studios, but my team and I there, we ended up starting GSSN, the Global Startup Studio Network. And then I went down this path for like 6 years where I was just all in on startup studios. We sold GSSN. I wrote the first white paper on the studio model. I ended up consulting and advising with like 120 some odd, something like that, like 120 studios around the world on all kinds of things. But the theme throughout that chapter was, while I was technically like in venture capital and I was being a finance guy and more a finance guy by the day, I was using my marketing mind and marketing chops to not just build and grow a company, but build and grow an entire sector or an industry. And so the numbers I can point to, even though it's kind of a random metric, but when I started working with studios, there were like 80 in the world. And after about 3 years, there's over 2,000. So I believe that was largely due to us creating the global network of studios, writing the white paper, all that. And then, I woke up one day towards the end of COVID, just like, I'm becoming more and more a finance guy by the day. I'm living in Excel. I don't want to do that for the rest of my life, but I've seen a lot in the world of venture capital. I've seen a lot in the world of marketing and early stage tech. I'm entering my later 20s. What do I want to do here? And so took some time off, got super into jujitsu and surfing, did a lot of soul searching for about 6 months. That was a few years ago now. And what I came out of that process with was I was a CMO for a startup for about a year and a half, and then landed back running my agency again under a new name, new brand, and that's Thursday Labs. And so we've got a really focused offering and product right now for early stage founders, for VCs. And I mean, that's my network. That's the world I know, but really focused on helping them create content in a way that most founders and most VCs are not creating content at all, let alone well. So we try to make really damn good content in a very methodical and rinse and repeat way that's super low touch for them. So that's the long and short of it. I'm still an action sports guy. I still love to surf and do jujitsu. I am based in New York, but moving to Southern California pretty soon. And that's that.
I got to say that your story and Ryan's story and my story all kind of align. You had the camera, I had the lighting for the concerts. So
nice.
That's
cool.
what I did is I was the light guy. And so I got into all the shows, got to do all the fun stuff, kind of the same as you with the camera. And it's funny how you don't have to be the pro basketball player, but you can be affiliated with them and be in that world if you're the right fit for it. So
totally.
Yeah.
Were there any notable shows that you LD'd for?
I've done Stereophonics out of the UK. I did Fall Out Boy. I did all sorts of amazing shows back in the day. It was a lot of fun.
That's fun. My roommate in college in Boulder was an LD, and he got to the point where he was working with, I think he did Bass Nectar show, Pretty Lights. So he was at Red Rocks a lot, and there were a few shows where like, yeah, we're his manager. We need to be with him to do lights, and we would just hang out backstage or hang out in the light booth, and that was cool. It was cool.
I would bring Ryan was my manager, right? He would show up to all the shows.
Well, and depending on the shows, I was hanging out with Mike, or I was
helping set up.
Well, and in some cases, my version of this was I was doing concert posters and stuff for different musical groups, and ended up managing a bunch of them. So I was the road manager. So nice. We'd come to town, and actually that's how Mike and I got connected. Is he was the lights guy for one of our shows, and then it all went from there. So we've been running around for 20 years from that. So
that's cool. I feel like there's this pattern of you talk to like adult marketers and designers, like where'd you get started, and you either hear action sports or the music industry. Like totally makes sense. Totally makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think too that there's something, and not to toot our own horn. I mean, I don't know exactly how old you are, but based on your background, I can tell that we're at least somewhat contemporary. And having those experiences, sort of the little piece of life that was pre-internet, I think is wildly advantageous for people in our sort of age group, plus or minus 10 years. Because I think that there's a lot of, I mean, not to say that, younger marketers and people like that aren't coming up in a world where they're going to have their own version of expertise or whatever. But I think that we were gifted, by virtue of the nature of the thing, we had to learn a little bit of how to do everything. If you wanted to be online, you had to you had to pick up at least a little HTML. Yeah. If you wanted to design, you had to either, steal software or whatever, I mean, it wasn't until the Creative Suite that I started paying for Adobe. I mean, my whole life I was stealing it, and I even was learning on corporate copies at one of my old jobs.
Totally.
And, so it's funny just to hear those old stories, because I think they're, super relatable to people our age, of course, but I think especially for people in, various aspects of media, it's a big part of it.
Well, that and the learning how to do HTML with MySpace and editing video back in that time frame wasn't the easiest thing in the world. I mean, just having the computer capable of editing video is a major part of it, and a lot of kids didn't have that. So
I feel like I took for granted. I mean, I remember vividly, like I come home from middle school, I'd lay on my bed, like on my stomach with my thick, loud MacBook running some pirated version of Final Cut, whatever, just like getting lost for hours. I mean, we're talking all afternoon, all night for weeks straight after school, working on one edit that would just like go out to 60 people on YouTube. And like, what a wild west for I don't know, the internet and for those tools. What a wild west time frame. And I totally took that for granted. I was a little teenager, so I didn't really know, but now I'm like, oh, fuck, I gotta sit down and like edit a video for 6 hours. Like,
right.
Could I just hire that done now?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit then about sort of, I guess, the establishment of your company, or maybe the things that have changed. So you mentioned, that you started in your company early on, and then you sort of moved away from it. You did a couple other things, and this is intriguing to me because I've done versions of this in my own agency, which, began life as an extension of my freelance career. Yeah. And so, which was just an extension of being asked to do too many concert posters. So I had to start charging money for it.
Sure.
And so as the business evolved, but I moved away, I took a job, I did these different things, in those early days. And so, and it sounds like, you and I have similar trajectory there. So I wonder if you talk about sort of the, as best as you can, talk a little bit about what it was like the first time. And then when you circled back and were able to apply sort of life experience and new learnings and all those things, what changed between the way your business was and the way it is? And if there's anything you can talk about in that journey.
Yeah, it's a good question. I can share some stories for sure, that kind of maybe like one long and a story that's even continuing. It'll never end as to what's gone on. But I mean, one thing I can say for sure is I definitely have what I think a lot of us refer to as like founder ADD. A lot of entrepreneurs and solopreneurs have this, where you get really excited about a new concept.
You were describing our life right here.
Yeah. I mean, how rich it's going to make you, how many people you're going to help. And then you get in like 3 to 6 months down the line and you realize, well, it's not anywhere near what you dreamed of. It's taking a lot longer than you thought. It's harder than you thought. And that really hit me the first like 2 or 3 at bats, I'd say. And each time it was a little bit less significant, but I remember like I was in a rough place after my first product launch, even. You build up this story in your head of what success is going to look like, and then you're not even close. And it's like, fuck, why am I doing this even? So I've done the soul searching for sure. And then when that happens, you got to like take a step back and look at like, all right, like what is working? What are people resonating with? What questions am I being asked? I'm super impatient. And I'm like trying to just make this thing work as fast as I can for no reason other than like, I've got this arbitrary date in mind as to when I need to succeed by. And the only real date that you could possibly assign to that is like, I got to pay rent in X number of days. And when you're young and like, I don't know, I didn't have any money given to me. I had to pay rent by starting companies. Like there is a date where like, I got to make a buck to keep the lights on and feed myself. So that just kind of kept continuing until it didn't anymore. But first time I was freelancing, building websites for solopreneurs that were like my parents' friends and, people around Boulder, Colorado. I was 18 years old. And then it just got to a point where I was like, all right, there's too much work to handle on my own because I'm in college and I need to go to class. So I should probably hire some people to help me. And then very quickly, as I was in the hiring process, I realized college students suck. Like college students are just really tough to hire, really tough to work with. I can't rely on them for anything. And like, I'm a college student, but I grew up in New York and I grew up in a very entrepreneurial and business first household, a rather tough love household. And I was raised by parents and grandparents that just drilled chivalry and manners and communication into me very, very aggressively. Not abusive, but aggressive. And I think I got to college and I knew how to talk to adults. Like I knew how to shake someone's hand and look them in the eye, and I knew how to write an email or how to respond to a text message, or like if an adult threatens to sue me and I'm 17 years old or 19 years old, like I didn't know how to deal with it, but I at least like didn't freak out and knew how I could at least try to communicate with people. And I think that's what allowed me to then realize that like a lot of other college kids lacked in that area. And I wanted to fix that. I wanted to help more people learn how to be more adult, essentially. Because it just helped me. And like I felt that was a valuable skill, I guess. So what I built was then an agency in Boulder called Eyesight, EYESIGHT. The name meant nothing other than I just thought it was a cool name, and I have really bad eyesight, so it was kind of ironic. But the whole play was like, yeah, there's all these startups in Colorado, especially those in Techstars and the other accelerators in town at the time. And that was like right when Techstars was really blowing up in Boulder. But none of them could afford all the agencies in town because they were great agencies. And those agencies are working with like Lyft and Uber and Burger King and like massive companies. So there's a lot of value in the agency and the startup working together who are on the same block, like literally before remote work was a thing. So I was like, well, what if I built the agency that all the startups could actually afford? And what allows them to afford us if my talent was all students and I could help the students learn how to become great professionals, but they're already great designers. They're great videographers. They're good at building websites. If we charge a client, $5,000 for a website, that's like a huge deal for them. And for us as college kids, that was a lot of money. I mean, that's an entire semester's worth of food and booze right there. So I built that for a bit. And then, yeah, as I just got older and went through college, I got to a point where I was like, well, I don't want to be a graduate from college and still working with college kids. Like I want to move on and be an adult. And I also just got tired of working with clients. I mean, I was a classic example of running a marketing agency that was like, we'll do all types of marketing for anybody, which I had to learn the hard way that like, no, you can't be everything for everyone. You have to solve one problem for one type of person and like maybe expand a little, but like that's how you scale and that's how you build a business. And I didn't know that at the time. So that was a big wake up call. And my reaction to that was to quit agency life and become a founder and build a tech company. I also really envied all of the founders who were my clients. I was like, you get to raise money and like pay yourself with that. And you get to build a product and only think about one problem and one solution and one product all the time versus like 9 or 20 because I have all these clients. And I was intrigued by that. And so then I shifted from agency founder to startup founder. We built a startup that was adjacent to that space, but still, it was an evolution of all the problems I'd seen in the agency world. And then I never like thought about wanting to be a VC or wanting to end up in venture capital, but the startup studio space was a good middle ground where I can like build products and build startups and create things with my hands, but also be investing in them at the same time. And like, that's what the studio incubation world is all about. And just went down that path for a while. Today we're at this point where I'm like, all right, if I'm going to run an agency again, I actually don't even want to call it an agency. Like I know the byline that you guys used as the intro on this podcast was like a content agency. And as of recently, I've decided like, no, I run a content company. This isn't an agency. And I say that because I think there's a lot of stigma, especially in the startup world around agencies. There's 1.5 million agencies and they're all like, we're different. But like when everyone claims they're different, that means they're all the same, right? And I catch myself. I was even at a dinner last night and I was like, I run this agency, content agency, but like we do things differently. And I was like, fuck, I can't believe I just said that. And so I think the big things I've learned here are like, I've worked with a lot of agencies ever since mine as well in the last 6-ish years, running a startup, running numerous startups and being in venture. The things that I decided I didn't want to do were I didn't want to just be like everyone else. I didn't want to be stuck working on client problems. I need to build a system that either doesn't have as much room for those problems to exist in the first place or like cleans up those problems almost on autopilot or I have a team for it. But I'm spending my day building the company and not working in the business. I want to work on the business versus in the business. So that was a big mindset shift. A lot of that came from reading the book Built to Sell. Actually just queued it up to listen to the audiobook this weekend when I'm on a road trip for like the 4th time. I need to listen to it again. It's just like my Bible when it comes to this stuff. So I was like, I want to build a productized service, if that's kind of the phrase that goes out these days. And I want it to scale. I want this to become something that, look, I'm down to work on this 100 hours a week for 2-3 years. But after that, I really want this to be almost fully autopilot for me. I don't believe there's really anything out there that's like completely passive income, but you can get pretty close. And that's one of my intentions with this business right now. I want it to enable me to live the life I really want to live. In years past, I didn't even think about the life I wanted to live much. I just thought my whole life was my company. And that caused some challenges for me emotionally and mentally and even physically. So there's a lot of intention as to like what I'm really building this thing for. Like, of course, the number one thing is to solve a problem in the world for others. But the number two thing is like to enable the life that I actually want to live. Like, I just get one of these. This is my vehicle to do that. And so every decision I make is for the company is put up against those two criteria now. I don't want to raise money for this company. Like, I've been around the block with fundraising, both as a founder, as a VC, and then I went to raise a fund of funds as an LP. So like I've really seen it all. And quite frankly, I wasn't successful in any of those three. And I think it was largely due to the fact that I don't love it.
Yeah.
Like, I love other things. I'm not a finance guy. Like, there's a lot of elements to it where I'm just like, freaking hate doing this day to day. So I don't want to play in that world so much anymore, or at all right now. Like, maybe it'll come back, but my whole network is in venture. I believe I'm one step away or one intro away from pretty much anyone in tech, whether they're a VC or a founder at this point. So like, I use that network and I know this world. I mean, I know the founders, I know the VCs, not just personally, but also like, I know who they are. Like, I'm one of them. I really understand these people as a demographic, and there's a lot of problems in that space. One of which is one I can totally solve. And so I just like to play there, but I don't intend to raise money for this company. Kind of just like rambling now and all that, but those are some of the things that I would say I've picked up over the years that have made me just help the decisions of where I'm at now.
So one thing that intrigued me in your bio was the networking aspect, the 200 dinners and stuff that you've done across the nation.
Yeah.
And that to me is critical, like building that network and getting those connections and putting people in touch with other people, even if it doesn't really help you at the moment. Putting them together where they can be successful will open doors down the road. And I was wondering if maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that and how you got into that and how it's helped you.
Yeah, I've hosted at this point, I want to say 200 dinners around the country, actually around the world, because I've done a few out of the country now. So I could say that. I started this because, man, I was just bored and I was lonely. I was going through a rough breakup right after college, and I was living like a block from my ex-girlfriend at the time and kept seeing her car and seeing other dudes' cars in the driveway. And that was hard for me. And all my friends were moving away. So I was just like sad and lonely and really felt like I needed to meet new people. I needed to start dating again and meet cool women. And I needed to just like be inspired socially again after college. I think that's a problem that a lot of people don't talk about, is how difficult that transition is from college to recent grad life from a social life standpoint. So I was just like, actually, I got invited as a +1 to a dinner that was called the Baller Dinner in Denver. And the whole premise was, I think there were like maybe 10 people who were considered ballers. I actually don't love that phrase, but let's call them like interesting people. 10 people who were invited, and they each had to bring a +1. So there were about 20 people who showed up, and everyone at the table was like super cool, weirdly, wildly successful, and very diverse. Like, you'd have founders there, you'd have yoga teachers, authors, athletes, influencers. And this was 2017, so 6 years ago. And I vividly remember being at that table and just like having this sense of presence, of joy, of connection that I hadn't felt in months. And it was more than I'd ever really felt ever, because I was playing in college town for a while, for years. It's really all I knew. So like joy and fun was about like adventure and drinking and partying. This was now like joy and fun around like having deep conversation and connecting with adults and talking about like things that were actually keeping me up at night as a 22-year-old guy. And there were people that were 22 there. There were people that were 35 there, and 40 and 50 and everything in between. I was just like, damn, this is so cool. I could do this better. That's how I felt about it. So I started my own little dinner series. I was like, on Thursday nights, I'm going to make a reservation at a cool restaurant. I'm going to invite 3 people that I met recently that I don't really know yet, that I think are really cool. And they each have to bring one person that they also met recently that they're inspired by. And now you've got a table of 7 people that are all really cool and inspiring, and everyone makes new friends. And I called it the Interesting Persons Dinner. And I didn't think anything of it other than like, I wanted to do this. I wanted to meet new people. I wanted to start dating again. But what started happening was I was getting a ton of business out of it. But more importantly, everyone else at the table was getting business out of it, meeting new friends. There were quite a few romantic relationships that came out of it. And people all over the country now were, friends or friends of friends through Instagram were reaching out and being like, hey, I heard about this dinner that you did in Denver. Like, any chance you're going to do it in Chicago soon? Or like, are you going to come to New York and do this or whatever? And I was like, I don't know, like maybe, I guess. And people were asking me like, can I host a dinner? Like they were asking me if they could host a dinner in their city. And I was like, yeah, dude, host a dinner. I'm not stopping. Do whatever you want. What they were really asking me was like, Jake, can you build a brand around this and start expanding it and then like almost franchise it? It wasn't anything other than a dinner series to start. And no one was really hosting dinners at the time, especially in these like smaller cities outside of New York or LA or San Francisco. So yeah, I would just like travel for work a lot. And anytime I was in a different city, I'd pop up at dinner. So then I'm a branding guy. So I gave it the name Blue Plate and had a whole, it was like a rinse and repeat process of I'd pop up an Eventbrite link, I'd make a reservation, I'd send the same line of copy, and I would just change the date in the restaurant and fill up a table real fast. And then I moved to New York. That's where things changed. I was like, all right, this would actually be a really cool project. I'm not going to make any money off of this, but I'm not going to lose money off of it. If this breaks even and I build my social capital through this, which is a really important thing in New York City, especially in the startup world, then that will be wildly successful. And the whole premise was these are weekly secret dinner parties in like underground avant-garde spaces. And so every Thursday night, there'd be a dinner. And the only way to hear about one was to get on the text-only invite list. So it kind of made this like underground, secretive, like gave it this cool allure that I thought would bring back this element of New York in the 70s that all these young recent grads thought they'd get when they moved to New York, but they really weren't because it's not the 70s anymore. So anyway, word of mouth, you get on the text-only invite list, and every Monday there'd be a text that would go out that'd be like, what's up, fam? This week's dinner is going to be for 20 people. We're doing hot pot in Chinatown, or we're doing Mediterranean food in the East Village or whatever. RSVP here to claim your spot, first come, first serve. And the brand quickly became this thing where you always knew there'd be interesting people at the table and it'd be an amazing meal. So you knew that every conversation you had there wouldn't be a waste of 5 minutes, let alone a half an hour. But you didn't know who those people were going to be, and you didn't know exactly where it was going to be. So there was like this kind of secret element to it that just people would show up with this like weird vibe, kind of shy, and it would just make the most amazing experience for everyone. Because then the delta between how they were feeling when they showed up and how they started to feel after the second glass of wine and then when they left was like huge. I mean, transformational night for people. And that was part of the experience. So it just blew up, and we got to the point where I had people hosting these dinners in like 12 cities around the US every Thursday. I was kind of managing all of it, never made money on it. I actually lost probably like a few $1,000s just from like random moments here and there where I had to throw down my own credit card, but I got a lot of credit card points out of it, which was cool. And bought a lot of flights from that over the years. So that was that. And then when COVID hit, I had to stop, of course, just kind of like let it fall to the wayside. We had some press lined up, like the New Yorker and all these like cool magazines in New York wanted to write about it. And but right when COVID hit, they were obviously like, we can't publish an article about underground dinner parties in New York when pandemic's happening. So I just kind of like walked away for a while. And then when COVID stopped and New York reopened, I rebranded it to Thursday Club. And that's where the name Thursday Labs came from. And tried to pop it up again, but just like felt ever since then that dinners are really overplayed now. Like everyone and their mother is hosting a dinner party in New York every night. And I try to now do fewer events, but higher quality events than just like another dinner at a cool restaurant. And these events are meant to stand out and be unique and be a little more, not exclusive, but more scarce. Like if they're every Thursday, people are like, well, I can't go this week, I'll just go to the next one. But now if it's once a month or once a quarter and a lot more curated with like a crazy atmosphere and some wild experience that takes place when you're there, like you'll never forget that. And you have to be at the next one. So that's what they are now. That's the what behind it. The why is a whole different ballgame, and the how, but that was the long and short of what we built.
Nice.
Well, let me just point out a couple things that you crossed along the way there, because I think in telling that story, I mean, you revealed a lot about your character and what you're interested in, but you also just outlined a couple skills. And so I want to point those things out as individual things that maybe people should be, thinking about or working on. One of the things you said early on, it actually makes me think of my youngest kid, is this idea of being able to talk to adults when you were young.
Yeah.
I mean, I know adults who now can't speak to adults very well. And, but like kids like my now 12-year-old have been talking to adults since he was a little kid. And in fact, he's more popular with adults than he is with younger kids because they just don't get him, you know? And, sorry, my getting scratchy. Sorry. So anyway, so I think that skill set is really important because the ability to talk to people in a way that's comfortable and natural does a lot of things, right? It builds trust, it builds rapport, it does all this stuff. And it's funny listening to sort of your take on the importance of relationships and things like that, because obviously it's something that's really critical in our business too. In fact, our little slogan is you've got to break bread to make bread, right? So it's this idea that you need to spend time together and eat meals and do all that kind of stuff if you really want to make money, you know? And so I think that, you know, I've got a lot of similarities with you in that. So I just want to talk a little bit about that idea of, you know, sort of being able to address adults, you know, and speak to them that way, because I think it's really important. One of the other things I noticed, probably because we did this little retrospective on where you were and where you are, is, you know, how priorities seem to shift and change a little bit with age. Yeah. And I don't know for your, you know, in your situation, if it's exactly age, like maybe it's not because, oh, well, I'm getting older, you know, it's not like the end is near kind of thing, but just has to do with what's important to you when you're young and what's important to you when you're older. And it seems like now you're really crafting kind of a lifestyle where maybe before you were just looking for work. Right. And I think both Mike and I can relate to that and have been guilty of doing the same thing, where we sort of create our job and now getting older, you know, we're starting to consider other ways of looking at things. So I think that that's really important. And then the last thing I just kind of wanted to touch on as a summary was sort of this networking component, right? You know, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and places like this, and I see these conversations going on all the time, especially with young people looking for work, where they sit and they talk and they send out messages, you know, that are like, I've sent out 200 resumes and not getting any bites. I've, you know, done XYZ that's ridiculous and too much of it and nothing's working. And what it makes me think, you know, is back to this concept of building like real life relationships with real people, is that literally every job, every client, every success moment I've had in my life and career have all come from a personal relationship.
Yeah.
I never got a job because I had the best application or the best resume, but I did the best thing, or I had the right person, or I'd, you know, crafted the right relationship. And so I think that networking component, not to say that, you know, every person listening to this needs to go out and create, you know, a whole brand around dinner parties, but the point is you were proactive in your networking. And I think that being proactive in your networking versus standing around and waiting for it to happen to you is a critical component of just, you know, business growth in general, but also growth as a human and growth in everything else. So
totally. I appreciate you mentioning all those. I mean, I'm just doing it, so it's hard for me to take a step back often and think like why it's happening or why I'm doing all those things, and to hear someone else categorize it and call it right out is nice to hear. It's kind of cool and flattering. So thank you. Yeah, man.
Well, I mean, and, you know, and I'll tell you too, I mean, you know, because I think for a lot of people, you know, I mean, myself included, you know, there's always been the, what do they call it? The imposter syndromes and the, am I doing the right thing? And, you know, and like right now, I mentioned to you before we got on the show that we're making a big transition in my company. And, you know, there's a lot of like doubt and uncertainty and stuff, you know, we've been doing this for 20 years and now all of a sudden I'm doing something different. And it's like, oh, you know, am I doing the right thing? Am I screwing everything up? You know, and so I think it's important to call out these little moments like these, you know, adulting 101 kind of stuff, or, you know, understanding the priorities shift and evolve, because I think it sort of makes you human. And then when people who are feeling like imposters hear stories like this, they can go, oh, wait a minute, I feel that same way. Like I'm doing the same things. We're just all living the human experience, right? And it, you know, might manifest a little different for different people, but like, and Mike can attest to this, but I mean, you know, we've done 300 plus interviews with people and, you know, all startup founders and CEOs and, you know, high powered people from different walks of life, but like the juice that they use to be creative is the same across the board. You know, it's applied in different ways. They put it into their own business, but these human experiences are just part of being human. And I think that we can knock down some of those sort of like imposter walls when we understand that everybody is experiencing the same thing. We all have the same doubt. We all have the same things. And so even when you look at the high powered, super successful VC, or, you know, the Elon Musks or whoever your tech startup du jour is, you know, that you're just in love with, when you look at these guys that seem wildly successful and it starts to feel unattainable. And that's when that, negative self-talk starts happening, start feeling like, man, I'm just not doing it. I'm not doing it. But then when you hear these kind of real stories, I think it's really valuable. So I tend to point them out probably more than Mike can stomach, but these things are always, really near and dear to me too. So I appreciate you laying out your story, but I do like to break them down that way because I think it helps people see them for themselves.
Sure. Totally. No, happy to share it. And sometimes I'm too much of an open book, to a fault at times.
Yeah, we kind of have the same problem sometimes. We'll get a little too deep when we shouldn't.
Yeah.
So, what's driving the move to California? You looking for just a new change of life, or you looking to change the business?
This is a life thing. I grew up in New York, but I've called myself for a few years now, which is a weird thing to say, but I'm like a mountain man living in the big city.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in New York and would spend a lot of time after school or on the weekends mountain biking or snowboarding. And when you're from a suburb of New York City, that's considered pretty freaking weird to hang out in the woods. And I first felt very motivated to move, one, because I was chasing a different life, but also I felt I needed to escape a life and a community of people that I just didn't feel I really aligned with, and it just wasn't me. And so when I moved to Colorado when I was 18, I really found a home and a community and just like a whole side of myself where I was like, damn, nature and being outside and being in, not just in the woods, but like being in the mountains, being in my truck, being in a tent, being near a river, just being outdoors. I felt my happiest, my most calm, my most clear, all of it. But, I get older and I started companies, and that's a huge part of my life as well. And there's just kind of always been this like really finicky balance of like, which one do I prioritize more? Is it like my business? Which one do I take more seriously? Like my company right now, or being in nature in the afternoons, early mornings, or weekends? And I've gone back and forth, literally gone back and forth between Colorado and New York like 4 or 5 times. And right now I'm in New York, and I've been in here in this apartment in this neighborhood for 2 years. And before that was deep in the mountains in Colorado, like no cell service, like really middle of nowhere on top of a mountain at like 10,000 feet elevation. And that's a big change, right? And I'm at this point now where I'm like, well, my business is going great and I have a dog and I still love my truck. I'm not ready to completely move to the other end of the spectrum again and call it a day on my business being the priority, but I do need to meet in the middle somewhere where I am able to be around more people and have better access to camping and surfing every day and snowboarding on the weekends in like great mountains, not small little hills in the Northeast. I need a community of people that when I call them up and I'm like, yo, do you want to go camping for the next 2 nights, 3 hours from here? They're like, hell yeah. Versus in New York, they're like, I don't know. Like, I don't have a tent. Like, where do I even get a tent? And like, maybe I'll let you know. It's just kind of how it's just not part of the culture out here. So as hard as it is to like leave my home again and bail on my favorite city in the world, I do feel I'm being called to slightly different life day to day and outside of my work where just more balance, better community. I'm single and I want to be dating with more intention these days. I'd like to start to find a life partner, and I'm struggling and to me, somebody that's also very outdoorsy and loves to be outside on the weekends. I'm having a hard time finding that in New York. And so that's another motivator for the move. If there's any single cool outdoorsy women listening, like feel free to reach out, I guess. I'll plug it. So yeah, that's the move. I've lived in the mountains. I've lived in the city. I've not lived on a beach yet. And that's what I got to check off. I want to live like within a 5-minute walk of a gorgeous beach.
Love it.
So let's talk. I know you've got a heart out here, so we've only got about 10 or 15 or 10 or 12 more minutes. But I'd like to maybe talk about something a little more practical. I mean, obviously we've covered a lot of, I guess, what you would bucket as, sort of theoretical or philosophical kind of discussion, which I think is equally valuable. But I wanted to talk a little bit about content, given that that's sort of your expertise. Yeah, obviously, content has evolved quite a bit. And I'm not actually a content guy, but I have a basic understanding some of it, which is that, in the early days, I felt like you could get a little bit more away with just kind of content for the sake of making content, right? It was basically the name of the game, or the way to beat the algorithm was to be consistent. Didn't really matter what you were doing, just be consistent.
Yeah.
And I feel like, obviously algorithms have gotten smarter over the years. And, I mean, for those of us old enough to have seen these networks come online, I mean, obviously they've become much more sophisticated, and the way that we communicate is totally different. And so I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about sort of where we are today in sort of the content life cycle. What types of content are playing best for people, or getting people the most bang for their buck? And where are maybe the pitfalls, like the things that we should be flat out avoiding, or that are sort of like those old truths where it's like, I always do it this way because somebody told me this is how it's done, but maybe that's not accurate.
Totally. The way you phrase this question is actually the entire, I guess I'd say, like, framework or backstory to my business model and our philosophy and actually our product. So I could share how I landed on what we build, but also what we do at Thursday Labs. And I think that'll answer all of your questions there along the way. So first thing I would say is the phrase content for content's sake. I'm so glad you bring that up. We're no longer living in a time where you can get away with content for content's sake and have success with it. Sure, it depends how you measure success. If you measure success by being like, I just want to post something on every channel every day of the week for the next year, but you don't care about what comes out of it, okay, cool. That's content for content's sake. I believe, and I even have this plastered on my website for the next couple of days. It's going to come down and I'm going to redesign where it goes. But say goodbye to the days of content for content's sake. Now it's all about content for revenue's sake. And somewhere in the middle of those things is content for engagement's sake. But when you're running a company and you get great engagement metrics, but it's not yielding any revenue, then that's a bad investment. And I don't know, I'd love to be challenged on that. Like, find me someone who disagrees with me on that one. I genuinely don't believe that's a good investment. Content for content's sake, just for engagement. So there's another layer to this, which is like, okay, how do we produce content that actually drives revenue and like moves our company forward? Or if it's your personal brand, like, you should have a goal. Is the goal of the personal brand to get a new job? Is it to have better investment opportunities? Is it to sit on board seats? Is it to build your company? Whatever it is, there should be a goal with the content. And so what we do is, we start with that end goal in mind: revenue, growth numbers, like number of leads, whatever it is. Then you work backwards. I believe the best place to start with all of this is thought leadership. And I work with B2B brands. It's not the right formula, I don't think, for consumer-facing brands and content in that front. So that's a wholly different conversation that I'm decent at, but not as good with B2B things. On the B2B front, people are still people, and like, people buy from people, people sell to people. At the end of the day, I find it so funny when brands, companies tell me like, well, we're a B2B company. Like, why should we be on TikTok? It doesn't even make any sense. Or why would we be on Instagram? It doesn't make any sense. It makes complete sense, because you still have to sell to a human being. They're still going to make that purchase decision. And that human being has anxieties and has downtime and has boredom like everyone else does, and sits in their bed at night scrolling through TikTok, and they're still thinking about their work because people don't shut that shit off. So what we do is we help develop founders and entrepreneurs and lawyers and authors and exited founders, whatever you want to call it, help develop them into great thought leaders. We do that through them hosting a podcast. Now, I know what everyone thinks when I say podcast, which is like, well, why would I watch a podcast? Like, who's going to listen to my podcast? No one's going to listen to it. Everyone has a podcast. Doesn't matter. I don't care about people listening to your podcast. That's not what this is for. What this is for is all the things that come out of the podcast. Literally, we do a 45-minute recording. You guys probably do this too. We're doing it right now. No one's going to sit here and listen to this 45-minute recording. We'll be lucky if anybody gets to our 52 minutes in to hear my spiel on this. But we're going to pull the short clips out of it. We're going to put those all over every social media channel. We're going to take the transcripts and turn that into a blog post, turn it into a newsletter. We're going to turn it into a tweet thread and a LinkedIn post. And everything's going to be tagged back to the full episode or back to your website, which is where you're collecting leads. That's what people pay attention to. So the podcast is the ultimate source of content. And so additionally, people think that, well, if I'm going to create thought leadership, I need to go out and talk about things that make me sound really smart. I need to like talk about me. I need to talk about my viewpoint. I need to share my opinion. I need to have an opinion. I think that couldn't be further from the truth. I strongly believe that's the wrong approach, because there's millions, tens of millions of people out there who are getting on TikTok and getting on LinkedIn and just talking about themselves, talking about their company. And we hate them. Everyone hates them. They don't care about you. No one cares about your company. They're trying to tell the world and show the world how smart you are. We're all guilty of it. I'm guilty of it at times. But the people we do really respect in general are the folks who create a platform and a space to share other people's stories. They ask really damn good questions to pull out information, entertainment, inspiration, education from the others. It's like what you guys are doing right now. Like, people probably love you guys more than they love me because you're creating the space in the first place. You're the ones asking the good questions. So I like to put the thought leaders that we're developing on as the hosts of these podcasts. And then what do we actually do tactically? We do all the end-to-end work for them to basically have content out on every single channel every single day. What that looks like and why we do it is because everyone feels, not everybody, a lot of people feel that they need to be producing content. They need to be everywhere all the time. They need their story to be told. They need to go from unknown to known in order to reach their ultimate revenue goals, their growth goals, their insert goal here. And the thought, though, of producing all that content, doing all the logistics, doing all the editing, doing all the posting, staying up to date with all the different platforms that they could be posting on, and learning how to navigate them, staying up to date with all these AI tools that are coming out that help the process of making content easier and faster. It is so overwhelming for most people, to the point where they're like, I can't do it. I'm not gonna do any of this. Maybe every now and then I'll like put out a newsletter or put out some LinkedIn posts, but they don't have a real strategy behind where they're posting and when and what they're posting on each of those places and what that's for. Me and my team do all of that for them. So we call it content in a box. We start with a month, and that's the month where I work directly with the client to develop their strategy. Like, what are we actually going to talk about? Like, how are we going to attract customers or leads or whatever it is through this content? And then after that, all they need to do is show up for an hour a week to be the host of their episode. My team does all the coordination with their guests, helping them find their guests, which is a combination of our network and their networks. Getting those guests prepared for the podcast, getting the episode actually recorded, sent over to our editing team to edit all the clips, getting all the content approved by the guests and the hosts themselves. And then we run their social channels to actually post it every day on 11 different channels. That's YouTube, Spotify, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube Shorts, blog, newsletter, their website, Apple Podcasts. There's a few more. So the whole goal is, over the course of 4 months, you're going to produce 12 full episodes, which is going to yield like 500 pieces of content across all those channels every single day. You're going to be everywhere all the time. And as soon as you have a question or a concern about like, what's the strategy here? What hashtag should we be using? What time of day should we be posting on each channel? It's like, don't worry about it. We're on top of that. Don't even think about it. Just show up for your hour a week. This is all on autopilot for you.
Love that.
No, I love that. Well, and I also appreciate your dog showing up. That'll help our engagement numbers here at the end. Yeah, so that'll be great.
That's his spot. He just purchased. I don't even know what he looks at. He just like stares out the window for hours.
Hey, he's got a view. You know, it's not bad. So cool. Well, no, I appreciate you laying all that stuff out for us. I think, I mean, to your point, and we've maybe spent too much time on philosophy and not enough time on tactics, but I think it's really important the way that you laid everything out, and that it's easily understood that there are solutions for all this busy work. Because obviously there are a lot, but both Mike and I are big advocates of what you're describing, which is this idea of doing the work once and then multi-purposing it. I think that if you listen to the Gary V's or any of these guys, they all sort of advocate for models like that. So so it's cool that you're doing something like that, because obviously to do it in-house is time consuming and expensive and all those sorts of things. These are services that seem to me anyway to be better left with the professionals that focus on that. Than trying to do it in-house or try and make, your secretary keep up or, whatever it is people do, because they tend to either really value creating content or undervalue. And so when they undervalue it, it ends up being pretty ugly sometimes. Yeah. I mean, content in general, it's become a full-time job to do it well and do it right. But hire a head of content for $150K to do that for you. And like, there's only a few people out there who are actually really good at it. That's the problem that we're trying to solve is be that full-time role, but we do it
in a productized way.
Love it. Well, we're kind of at that time. Do you want to tell people where they can reach out, how they can get in touch with you if they're interested in your service?
Yeah, LinkedIn is my go-to. I test a lot of content strategies and new tools on my own LinkedIn channel to see what types of things are working before bringing it to my clients. So I put out a lot on my own LinkedIn. It's Jake Hurwitz. My name is spelled how it sounds essentially and listed here. So you look me up there. And then our company is thursdaylabs.co. That's the website. Everything's there. I update the website pretty regularly, actually, which I didn't used to do when I ran the agency years ago. And so this new offering will be reflected within the next week or two on the site, now that we're seeing some traction with it.
Nice.
Very cool. Well, I love it. Well, thanks so much, Jake, for taking the time to talk with us. I mean, this has been great. And just, I think, kind of going through the life cycle of an experienced entrepreneur who's seen so many different facets, I think is a really valuable, I guess, story for people who might be sort of, at one end or the other of their own career and have any sort of doubt on their own. And then also, really appreciate you dipping into content for us.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you guys. This was a great conversation. Lots of fun. And hope I was able to be helpful for both you guys and anyone listening.
Yeah. Absolutely. And thanks so much to you and everybody who listens to the show every week. And I guess we'll see you guys next time.